Residing in an apartment complex, Lex comes with a certain amount of anonymity. You walk past your neighbors in the hallway and they nod courteously, but you hardly ever speak more than a few words. I liked it that way. I liked coming home, locking my door, and keeping the outside world out. For this reason, I installed a security camera outside my apartment. I didn't do it because I felt unsafe, but rather out of caution. The building already had cameras in the hallways and elevators, but I preferred to have my own pair of eyes. I occasionally reviewed the footage, mostly out of habit. It was comforting to know that if something ever happened, I'd have evidence that nothing out of the ordinary for months. However, one night, I noticed something odd. I had arrived home late from work and was absent. Mindedly scrolling through my security app while eating dinner, the feed from my door camera showed the usual empty hallway, nothing out of place, but when I switched over to the elevator footage, my stomach twisted because at exactly 3:12 a.m. a man stepped out of the elevator and stood in the hallway. He didn't move, he didn't knock, he just stood there facing my door. I watched, expecting him to do something, to press the wrong doorbell, to turn away, to leave, but he didn't. For 7 minutes he stood motionless. Then, without a word, he turned and got back into the elevator. I would have never known. I hadn't heard a sound. My building was quiet at night, the kind of place where the only noises came from the occasional footsteps of a neighbor coming home late. But I had never noticed anyone lingering outside my door. Before I rewound the footage and watched it again, looking for any details I might have missed. The man was tall, wearing a dark hoodie. With the hood up, his face was obscured, but his posture was unnerving, completely still, like he was waiting for something or someone. I told myself it was just a fluke. Maybe he was drunk, maybe he had the wrong floor, maybe. But then curiosity turned into dread. I started scanning through the security logs, checking past footage for the last 2 weeks. The same guy has been doing the same thing every night around 3:12 a.m. He had been standing outside my door every night, watching, and I had never noticed. I slowly turned my head toward my apartment door, half expecting to see someone standing on the other side. But my breath felt shallow and my fingers were clenched around my phone as I stared at the screen. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to stop. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling while holding my phone tightly. By 3 in the morning, the slightest noise from the corridor sent shivers down my spine, and every creak in the apartment made my pulse race. At precisely 3:32 a.m., I was fully awake and monitoring the live stream from my security camera. The hallway was deserted, and the seconds passed slowly and oppressively. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped out. I held my breath even through the grainy security footage. His dark hoodie and his immobile posture made me feel as though I was suffocating. He wasn't here to visit someone else, he wasn't lost, and he wasn't here for me. I should have called the police, grabbed my keys, and run, but I was unable to do either. Instead, I sat there, paralyzed, watching the seconds pass by. 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 5 minutes. I considered calling out to him to leave, telling him I could see him, but what if that made matters worse? He turned, walked back into the elevator, and vanished after 7 agonizing minutes. I let out a shaky breath, my whole body trembling. This wasn't normal, and I couldn't ignore it. I had to do something, so the following morning I went straight to the building manager's office. His name was Kevin, and he was a man in his 60s who always smelled like coffee and cigarette smoke. He began shaking his head after I had barely finished explaining half of what had transpired. "Yeah, that's not right," he said. stroking his chin. "You got the footage?" I opened the video on my phone and gave it to him. As he watched, his face darkened. I acknowledged that I didn't remember this neighbor. We keep track of every renter and visitor who enters the property, so if this person is coming in every night, we'll know how to. I nodded, holding onto the edge of his desk with my fingers. "Could you check the logs to see whether Hyun is a resident?" I watched over Kevin's shoulder as he quickly typed on his computer and brought up a list of key card entries. Every time someone used their fob to enter the building, it was recorded, and a screen flickered as it loaded the logs for the previous week. My heart was racing as I looked for the answer, and then I realized that the elevator camera had caught him, but the entry logs hadn't. He wasn't using a key card to get inside. He had never scanned in. He was simply there. I stepped back, my skin crawling. How could it be? Kevin scowled. Maybe he was sneaking in behind people as they opened the door, or he stopped. I followed his eyes back to the television, all the while feeling sick to my stomach. The video showed the guy entering after peering at my door, and the doors closing, but there was no sign of him leaving until I took a deep breath. So where in the world is he going? The man never utilized the elevator to go back down. Kevin didn't respond as he was unaware that I had closed all the windows and doors that evening. Every time the wind shook my balcony at 3:10 a.m., I pushed a chair under the doorknob, my pulse pounding. The corridor was deserted when I activated my security feed, so I tightened my hold on my phone. 3:12 a.m. The elevator doors opened, and the man emerged. He took a step forward this time, and then another, and I felt my breath catch. He had never moved before, never come very close, but now he was approaching my door. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking, and dialed 911, 911. "What emergency do you have?" I was whispering to the man outside my apartment. "He's been coming every night, and he's standing right there. Please, please, send someone, stay on the line." He was just a few feet from my door when he reached for the handle, and I barely had time to react before the hallway camera cut to static. The screen flickered black for a moment, then went completely blank. I stared at my phone, my pulse pounding in my ears, and I gripped it tighter. "Hello," I said to the dispatcher. "Are you still safe inside your apartment?" she asked. "I think so, but the camera just cut out my voice shaky." I returned my focus to the hallway and listened, but my breathing was too loud and the quiet was so loud that I had to strain my ears to hear anything, like a footstep or someone attempting the handle, but all I heard was a steady, purposeful knock. My heart almost stopped when I heard 3 steady knocks on the wood in my apartment. I swallowed hard because he had never knocked before. I looked at the door, half expecting the knob to turn, but instead I heard footsteps that made my stomach drop. They were slow, measured, and paced right outside my door, as if he knew I was inside and was too afraid to move. The dispatcher's voice jolted me back, and I flipped back to the hallway camera feed in the hopes that it would return. The screen flickered, and then the feed came back, but the hallway was empty. I blinked, and I heard him knocking. "Hyun's gone." I whispered, "I don't know where he went," and the pacing had stopped. The hallway was silent, but I knew he was still nearby. But then something made my stomach turn. I checked the elevator camera, and the man had always left in the same way, getting back in the elevator and vanishing, but tonight there was no footage of him ever entering. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb, wondering, if he wasn't in the hallway anymore, where the hell did he go? Its officer was summoned by the voice. "Daniels, are you inside?" We received a call from dispatch. When I eventually managed to open the door, 2 cops in uniform were standing outside asking whether I was all right. My hands were trembling so badly that I fumbled with the latch twice. Officer Daniels inquired while looking around the corridor. I shakily breathed. "I don't know, he was just here." He knocked and then paced outside my door, but when the camera returned, he was gone. The cops looked at each other, and we had already inspected the stairwells and halls. Daniel remarked, "No sign of anyone." I combed through my hair in an attempt to make sense of it. We even looked through the elevator records, I'm sure. No unlawful key card scans were added by the other officer. I shook my head, saying that there was no unexplained movement inside or outside the building. He had been here for weeks, so we'll look at the surveillance tape. Daniels promised that we would identify the person if they have been knocking on your door every night. I nodded while continuing to hold my phone. I read through the security records as you requested when Kevin, the building manager, contacted me the next morning. His voice was softer than normal, so I sat up and paused again. We found nothing, which made my stomach sink. There was no video of him at all, and Kevin went on, "Not in the elevator, nor in the hallways," so I shook my head and gripped the phone even more tightly. I saw him. He was there. The sister system doesn't lie, so if someone had been in the building, we would have seen them. Kevin paused, but I opened my security app and scrolled through the saved recordings, finding that every video of him standing outside my door every night was still there. However, now something was different. When the elevator doors opened at 3:12 a.m. the night before, the hallway was deserted, and I could see my breath catching in my throat. I knew what I had seen. I had seen him leave and knock on my door, but now there was nothing, as if he had never been there at all. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Over the phone, Kevin's voice cracked. "Maybe you should spend a few nights somewhere else just to be safe." I took a deep breath and said, "Maybe I should pack a bag and stay at a hotel that night rather than checking my security feed or looking at my phone." I just switched on the TV, shut the door, and tried to act as if nothing had occurred. The next morning, I received an email from the building security firm with a basic system update warning. I quickly read it and saw that it spoke about automatically deleting corrupted video from my stomach. It's been a few weeks since I moved out of the building and moved to a new place across town without elevators, and I never figured out who he was or how he got in. However, sometimes late at night when I close my eyes, I can still picture him standing there still silently watching, and I can't help but wonder if I checked the hallway camera tonight would he still be there. Twisted, I went back to my app and saw that all of the old recordings of him standing outside my door had been erased. I stared at my screen, my heart racing. Since I've never been a big sleeper, every little sound wakes me up, including creaking floorboards, distant vehicle alarms, and the wind shaking the trees outside. I always keep my room quiet and chilly, with my window shut and my blackout curtains pulled tight, so I knew something wasn't right. The air in my room seemed different and colder as soon as I woke up. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I sat up and turned to face the window. The curtains were still closed, and nothing seemed amiss. But then I saw faint, greasy fingerprints at the bottom corner of the glass. I twisted my fingers in my stomach. I was certain that I had locked the window before going to bed, but someone had been right there, touching the glass and attempting to get in. I forced myself to breathe. Perhaps there was a reason. Perhaps I had touched the glass earlier and forgotten. Perhaps it was condensation, or perhaps it was just random streaks that looked like prints. Long streaks that appeared as though someone had pressed their hand against the window from the outside caused my throat to dry out. My apartment is on the second floor, but the fire escape runs right past my window. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone climbed up, messed around, and left. Maybe it was maintenance. The landlord had people check the building occasionally, but wouldn't they have told me? I texted my landlord to ask if anyone had been on the fire escape. I reached forward and pressed my hand next to the marks, which were different in size and weren't mine. I checked the lock, which was still locked, and found no evidence of tampering, but that didn't mean someone hadn't tried. It gave me a sick feeling. The night before I sat there staring at the screen waiting, then my phone buzzed. Landlord, no inspections scheduled. Why? My stomach dropped. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. The image of those smudged fingerprints stuck in my head. By the time I got home, the sun had set. My apartment was dark, quiet, and as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it again, that wrongness. I flipped on the lights and checked the window. The prints were still there, but this time, they were higher up, as if whoever had been there last night had come back, and this time they had pressed their hand against the glass while standing watching, waiting. I locked the door, pulled the blinds, checked the fire escape. No one there, but the feeling wouldn't leave because I knew someone had been outside my window, and I had no idea if they were still watching me right now. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I turned off the lights, got under the covers, closed my eyes, but every time I started drifting off, my mind jolted me awake all I could. Think about where those fingerprints. Someone had been outside my window, and if they had come back once, what if they came back again at around 2 a.m.? I decided to check the fire escape instead of sleeping, so I got a flashlight and made myself do something I really didn't want to do. Before shining the light outside my bedroom window, I pushed it open just a crack. The metal stairs led down, empty and silent, with no scuff marks, footprints, or indications of who had been outside. However, this didn't make me feel any better because I knew someone had been there, and worse, I didn't know. When I cleaned the window the following morning, I took pictures first, just in case, and then I used disinfectant to scrub away the greasy imprints. I convinced myself that whoever it was had grown bored and moved on, and I even managed to get some sleep that night. However, when I woke up the following morning, I noticed that the fingerprints had returned, and this time they were higher up, smeared along the glass as though someone had leaned in closer, pressing their face against the window. I stumbled back, my heart thumping in my ears. But I knew that this wasn't normal. Someone was testing me while I waited for something. I called my landlord again, asking if they were certain that no one had been on the fire escape, but I could ask the maintenance guys why someone was touching my window. You want me to contact the police, landlord? That night, I stayed up, kept the lights off, sat up in bed with my phone in hand, and watched the window waiting. Nothing happened, at least not at first, but then around 3 in the morning, I wondered if I should even tell them that there were handprints on my window and that I hadn't really seen anyone. They would come look around and tell me to put up a camera, and maybe I should. I heard a gentle, purposeful tap on the glass, and I stopped breathing. The sound was cautious, as if someone was checking to see if I was awake, and I sat there, frozen in terror, staring at the shadowy figure just beyond the curtains. I had two options: either stay motionless or confront whoever was outside, so I chose the second option. Slowly, but surely, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, aimed it at the window, and something moved. A shadowy figure ducked away from the light. I heard heavy, fast footsteps as they ran down the fire escape, and by the time I reached the window, they were gone. I called the police again, this time with documentation, and I showed them the fingerprints, and they checked the fire escape, finding no evidence of forced entry or security cameras pointing in the right direction. The police didn't stay long. They asked the standard questions, such as whether I had seen anyone hanging around the building, if I had received any strange messages or threats, and if I had any enemies. I told them not to all of them. Someone had been outside my window, and they weren't just passing through, they had been watching me, perhaps waiting for an opportunity or a mistake. But one thing was certain: they were going to return. I had no idea who was doing this, why, or worse, if they did. The officer I spoke with, I believe his name was Martinez, gave me a flimsy assurance before leaving, saying, "If they try again, call us immediately." I knew better because this wasn't random. Whoever was outside my window was targeting me. And I didn't sleep at all after the cops left. I sat on my bed, gripping my phone like a lifeline, and stared out the window. The faint outline of smudged fingerprints still visible in the glare of the street lights. I should have gone to a hotel, crashed at a friend's place, or anything else, but I needed to know if they returned so I could see their face. I bought a cheap motion-activated security camera the following morning and placed it on my windowsill, pointing straight at the fire escape. I waited that night without turning on the lights, lying in bed with my phone in hand and staring at the feed from my new camera. It was grainy in the dark, but it was clear enough that I would see anyone who climbed the fire escape again. I told myself that I wouldn't sleep, that I would watch all night, but eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I was so excited that I almost dropped my phone when it detected motion in my stomach. I held my breath as the timestamp appeared on the screen at 3:12 a.m., twisted as I touched the alert and the film loaded. Then a figure stepped onto the fire escape. They moved slowly and carefully, with a dark hood covering their face. They leaned toward my window and pressed a hand against the glass. I watched with nausea for more than 2 minutes before something happened that made my blood drop. They took a key out of their pocket and pressed it against the window. I called the police again, and this time they took me seriously. They looked through the building and checked the footage, asking if I had given a key to anyone recently. No. I had no idea where they got it. Did they steal it, made a copy, and found one that I was unaware was missing? The police had no answers, but they did have advice: pack your bags and stay somewhere else for a few days. The file arrived a minute later, and I hesitated before opening it because I wasn't sure I wanted to see it, but I had to. The footage was clearer than mine, showing the fire escape outside my window and the dim glow of the street lights below. At first nothing happened, but at 3:12 a.m., someone stepped into frame, not just me. Martinez said. This time I listened. I left that night to stay with a friend across town, barely slept, and 2 days later, my landlord called. "You're not going to believe this," he said in a voice tight with unease. I gasped as I saw that I was wearing the same hoodie and that, In the dim light, my face was hardly visible. I watched in horror as I approached the window of my own bedroom and pressed a hand against the glass before carefully taking a key out of my pocket and pressing it against the window. I let my phone fall. That wasn't me, and I hadn't gone back or been close to my apartment, so how come I don't live there anymore? I packed up and left the same day I watched the video, and I have no idea how they did it since they looked just like me. How they were aware that my window was locked, but I do know that whatever was outside was attempting to replace me rather than break in, and I got out of there before they could.